Why does President-elect Trump want the debt ceiling abolished? Join Richard Abolish and me in this week's Libertarian Angle as we examine that question. Hi, I'm Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, and this is this week's Libertarian Angle for the new year. I'm here with my co-host, Richard Abolish, professor of economics at the Citadel. Richard, good to see you again, and Happy New Year to you.
And Happy New Year to you and to all of our dear viewers and listeners who kindly and generously give a bit of their time and spend it with us in these discussions.
Yeah, great to be back with you all. Thank you for your great end-of-year support. If you forgot to make an end-of-year donation, this is a great time to make a first-of-the-year donation, and we greatly appreciate your support. So, Richard, we're starting a new year out trying to achieve what we've been advancing here at FFF for 35 years now, the genuinely free society. And that, of course, means identifying all of the infringements on liberty, not reforming them, not reducing them, not streamlining them or making them more efficient, but making the case for eliminating them. And part of that, of course, is the out of control federal spending that has come into existence to support these welfare warfare state programs, the managed economy, the war on drugs, foreign interventionism, the military industrial complex, the national security state, the war on immigrants. I mean, you're talking about a lot of money here. Social Security, Medicare, all the other unfunded liabilities. If there's anything that everybody can agree on, federal spending is out of control. And the best manifestation of that is that for years, they've been spending more money than they take in with taxes. Now, how do they perform this magic act? They just go out and borrow the money. And there's been no hesitation to just keep adding on to the federal debt. We're now at over $36 trillion. I don't know exactly how much that amounts per taxpayer, but my best estimate is around $250,000 per taxpayer. Now, I doubt that taxpayers put that on their financial statements when they get a bank loan or a mortgage loan. Nonetheless, every taxpayer is on the hook for that debt, and to acknowledge the severity of this problem, Congress long ago enacted a debt ceiling. They said, look, from now on, this is the maximum amount of debt this government's going to incur, and there will be no going past that maximum. Well, each time that debt ceiling has been reached, they've raised it. And the last time it was reached, I think it was probably last spring. You and I were discussing this about the debt ceiling, and I said, Richard, they're pulling the same old thing they pull every time, the mainstream media. There's going to be a default. There's going to be a default in the government payment of the government indebtedness and so forth. And I said at that time that they're going to raise it like they always do, but as soon as it's raised, all the chicken littles and stuff are not going to say, look, we need to prepare for the next time this debt ceiling is reached. We need to slash federal spending now. And I predicted there would be no op-eds, no editorials, none of this from all of the people that were saying, raise the debt ceiling, please, 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 there'll be catastrophe. And sure enough, that prediction has proven to be correct. None of the mainstream press has been saying this needs to stop now, ever since the debt ceiling was raised the last time. We need to slash federal spending. Nobody's willing to do that. Now, they'll acknowledge that the debt's a problem, but none of them have said slash federal spending, which, of course, could easily be done if you start identifying all the infringements on liberty, the welfare warfare state, all the departments and agencies that do these things, the drug war. You could easily balance the budget. Now, when the crisis came due the last time, just to put things in context, the presidential election was coming up. So neither party wanted this to be a controversy during the presidential election. So they suspended the debt ceiling till after the election. And they both agreed to do that. And that suspension arrives in January, at which point the debt ceiling automatically is raised to whatever debt they've incurred since they reached that deal before the election. But that means that now we're in the debt ceiling crunch again. You can't go past the ceiling. Now my argument is, if Republicans are really interested about slashing federal spending, this is a great opportunity. You just stick with the debt ceiling. And that means no new debt. That means slashing federal expenditures so that there's a balanced budget. They have no choice at that point. Now they'll say, oh, there's a government shutdown. Fine, shut it down. Just here's your opportunity to show people you're serious. I think we both know, even the two big supposed government slashers, Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, are not going to go there. But what I think is happening is that Musk and Ramaswamy are headed to the collision course with their boss, President Trump. I don't think they have figured out. These are two smart guys. I don't think they have figured out that their boss is a big spender and a big borrower, because when this crisis over whether the government was going to get shut down a couple of weeks ago or right before Christmas, President-elect Bush was there saying, let's abolish the debt ceiling. In other words, let's get rid of it entirely so that he can borrow and spend to his heart's content. How does he reconcile that with his supposed quest to slash federal spending? He doesn't want any constraints, because as we saw in his first 4 years in office, he was a big spender, a big borrower. I think he added some $2 trillion, if I'm not mistaken, to the national debt. It was Trump that was sending out all those free stimulus checks to everybody, when you and I were saying there ain't anything free about these checks. Wait till you see the inflation rate, the debasement rate. And of course, that involves the Federal Reserve, which is a corollary aspect to this whole thing. But it's all a charade, Richard. These people, as I have repeatedly maintained, have absolutely no interest in slashing federal spending. You're going to see federal spending and federal borrowing going out the gazoo, especially if part of this deal, if Trump gets his wish and Congress ends up abolishing the debt ceiling entirely. What do you think?
Well, let me just sort of clarify and highlight some of the numbers that you were mentioning at the beginning. Right now, according to the National Debt Clock, which one can find on one's internet, the total national debt of the federal government is $26,288,405,000,000 and growing by the second. This means that the debt per taxpayer, and I use taxpayer because obviously some people are too old, too young, are not earning an income, don't file income taxes for one reason or another. That national debt is equal per taxpayer in the United States to $272 million. In
Now,
other words,
let me interrupt you. You said $26 trillion is the total?
Yeah, 36.
36.
36,
Yeah.
288 billion,
No.
407 million, and then counting. And that per taxpayer, again, because some are little kids who don't file or pay taxes, the elderly who may not, people who just don't pay it for one reason or another, don't file taxes under the welfare state. But the debt per taxpayer, in other words, what would we, each of us who are current taxpayers, have to pay right now as a lump sum to pay off the debt? That would be right now approximately $272,000, because we have a population of almost 335 million. Well, that's simple pocket change. You're carrying around about 300 million in your pocket right now in cash, right, Jacob?
Absolutely.
Of course, just like I do. And it's absurd. It's absurd. The other thing to highlight some points that you made, particularly with the new incoming Trump administration. Trump dominated the Republican National Convention. His fingerprints also were all over the convention platform. And if one reads the convention platform, I wrote about this in my article for the November issue of Future of Freedom, the FFF publication, monthly publication, that in the Republican platform of 2024, they made it very clear and even quoted Trump himself that under his incoming administration, not a penny, notice, not a dime, not a penny would be cut from Social Security or Medicare and Medicaid. Now, besides the defense budget, and now, of course, the interest payments, the largest factor making this debt grow, the budget grow, is Social Security and the healthcare programs. And you're saying from the outset, there will be no, if you'll forgive my term, given the reality of the politics, not even reform to try to slow down or stop or even partially reverse the growth in Social Security or Medicare and Medicaid. You're never going to get the budget under control. In other words, he's basically saying that the key items that is making government spending grow and therefore adding to the deficit spending to cover a good part of that spending is untouchable, which means there is no plan for austerity or budget management. And what Musk and the others can do is just going to be, as you're suggesting, window dressing. What they'll do is that they'll take things in the miscellaneous column of the federal government, and they'll say, we're going to eliminate waste here, we're going to eliminate redundancy there, and they'll applaud themselves, and they'll get the congressional votes, but it will all be things that are, in terms of the big picture, irrelevant in the miscellaneous column of total government spending categories. Because Trump himself has made it very clear, he wants national industrial policy. He has his version of the idea of where government should intervene, regulate, control, direct, manage, pressure business to go, what industry should be developed. He wants to raise tariffs and therefore impinge the free trade of Americans, both producers and consumers, with their potential and existing trading partners around the world by huge mega increases in the tariff barriers as he himself has publicized them. He clearly is not going to be cutting defense spending for all of his talk about, he's going to end the Russian-Ukrainian war in one day after taking office, or he'll settle the business between Israel and Hamas in Gaza. The fact is that he is determined to shift focus from Europe to Asia, where he sees the bugaboo to be mainland China, Xi Jinping's communist China. And the budget will have to be increased for there, as well as to do other things, including his threats to reoccupy the Panama Canal. I mean, you can't regain control unless you use military force. The Panamanians are not going to give it up of their own free will. Oh, he says he wants America to own Greenland. Denmark, which is the overall sovereign power over Greenland, though it has supposedly an internal domestic self-governing entity on the island, Denmark isn't going to give it up. And so now you're going to go to war with a NATO ally. I mean, so Trump has no intention of cutting the defense budget. All he plans to do is to follow his erratic, irrational, inconsistent pattern of personal decision-making about how he thinks America should be great, not how people as individuals should be great, making their own plans, their own choices, their own decisions as consumers and as producers, as the interactors of as customers and sellers in the marketplace, but as he wants it. The other thing here, which you were alluding to, which I think is important to mention, if they had left the debt ceiling rule alone, that is, in January, the period of government spending whatever it wants, but after day X, you've reached a new threshold of whatever spending was at that point, you're then in a balanced budget, because that says the government can't add to the debt. If it can't add to the debt, it can't borrow new money, no new deficit spending. From that day on, you are on a balanced budget. That is basically saying the government cannot spend anything or any more than what it takes in taxes. Now the government discovers what each and every one of us as private individuals know. There are limits to our resources. There's a thing called scarcity. The means at our disposal are less than the ends or goals or purposes that we'd like to attain. And then what happens if Trump says, well, we need to have more industrial spending here, or we need bigger anti-Chinese military outlays there? he would then have to go to Congress and say, to increase the portions of the federal budget that I want increased or spent in different ways, you now have to come up with, or I'm going to suggest, those other areas of government spending that will either be reduced or eliminated to replace, to be the funds to replace where I want government to grow or increase or be added to. That's the way it is under a balanced budget. Just like you or I go down the supermarket lane with our cart, and if we can't pick an extra can of peas off the shelf, we know we have a food budget. It's somewhere rattling in the back of our mind out of our earned income. It's a food budget because we have our house payment, we have our car payment, we have our other expenses for utilities, and we realize in the back of our mind that there's only so much that we can plan to lay out for our food. So if I pick an extra can of peas off the shelf, that means I have to buy less of something else and put it in my cart because every benefit has a cost. It's a trade-off. And now a balanced budget makes every citizen, every taxpayer, every politician know that there's a limit to the resources in society, including those available to government. And that now, if Trump wants to spend more, in spite of his promises to cut taxes, he's going to have to raise them if he's not going to cut anything. And then he has to tell the American voters who put him in office, after promising you tax cuts or no increases in taxes, I'm going to have to raise your taxes to do these other things I promised you. And then every taxpayer and every citizen will know that there's no free lunches. There's no way to have benefits today and make it go away seemingly by shifting the tax burdens to the future when hypothetically the debt is supposed to be paid off. They're going to discover that to have more now means having less of something else now. That is what a balanced budget means. It makes you face reality just as a pragmatic matter of budgeting. And that's what Trump is not going to want to operate under, and which is why he wanted the debt ceiling to just be abolished. So he can rant and rave that government is too big, there's a deep state, but he can just go on his merry way of spend, the same way the Democrats and other non-Trump Republicans have been doing for decades.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. But I think it's also important to emphasize that before they get to that problem of should we raise taxes to finance this new little program he wants, they have to slash spending first. Because as I understand it, they're spending around $2 trillion a year more than what they're bringing in. That has to be slashed first. But as part of this debt ceiling, they reach it. That means they got to start laying off people. They've got to cut the budget of the DEA by 50%. They got to cut Social Security or Medicare or whatever. Now, that's not the ideal from a libertarian standpoint. We'd get rid of these programs, get rid of the DEA, legalize drugs. But from a fiscal standpoint, that's something beneficial when you've got a balanced budget. And this is Trump's opportunity. He says he wants to slash federal spending. So when the debt ceiling comes due in January or whatever, they're already talking about it. The federal officials are saying, we're getting prepared for another government shutdown. Okay, get prepared. Trump ought to say, we're going to shut it down and we're going to slash spending and we're going to balance the budget. And then if you want to fund one of my new programs, like I want to finish my Berlin Wall along the border, or I want to have deportation centers run by the military, you got to raise taxes so people know that there's a cost there. Now, it's interesting that you bring up Greenland and Panama, because I think part of the shtick here is to distract people's attention away from the problem. I mean, that's one of the main benefits of a crisis environment is you look for scapegoats, number one. So we're going to see the illegal immigrants. That's going to be big time scapegoating, as if, this whole crisis is their fault. The notion will be, if we just get rid of these people, our system will work. Well, their system hasn't worked, and their system will never work. It's a bad system. But I think that's what this Greenland and Panama thing's about. He's already ramping up the new crisis with China. I don't think he'll do it as much with Russia, but who knows? North Korea, you could see a revival there. But he's talking about buying Greenland. So here's his mindset again, Richard. Okay, so how much would it cost to buy Greenland, assuming they were willing to sell it? $5 trillion? See, he's got no reservations about, oh yeah, we'll just pay another $5 trillion. We'll add, it'll be a debt of $41 trillion now. Same with Panama. Let's just buy it. And there's precedent for this. When they wanted the northern half of Mexico under the Polk administration in the 1800s, they offered Mexico a sum of money to buy the northern half of the country. Mexico said what Greenland has said and what Panama says, it's not for sale. And Polk just incites a war, provokes a war down there in Brownsville. And then after the war, which was easily won, of course, by the US, well, okay, as part of the war, we get what you've refused to sell us. We're going to take over the whole northern half of your country, but we're going to go ahead and pay you some amount of money. I don't know if it was the same amount they had offered him or not. But that's what they could easily do with Panama or Greenland. Just provoke a war, conquer, pay them off, take the property, and add to this debt. But my point is that there is no seriousness at all. These are Republicans. And everybody says, "Oh, Trump's going to slash federal spending." Come on. These are Republicans. We hear this every time they're Republican. Remember, Richard, they control all of Congress now. There's no excuse. Have you heard any talk about submitting a bill to abolish the Department of Education? I haven't heard one thing about that since the election. I heard it before the election. Oh, we're going to abolish the Department of Education, Jacob. But yeah, right. How have we heard anything about it since then? No, and we won't do it, even though they control Congress. You're not going to see any difference here, Richard. There ain't any difference between these Democrats and Republicans. They're two sides, flip sides of the same coin.
Well, that's because they, first of all, believe in the same ideas and are the same pragmatic politicians. They believe in the same ideas because it has been a very long time when forget about the Democrats, a Republican has even rhetorically said that there is a vision of America to make America great again. And making America great again is returning it to its constitutional framework that the founders originally laid down. And anything that is not in that original Constitution as enumerated powers and obligations are unconstitutional by definition. And therefore, we are now proceeding to cut and abolish all those aspects of government activity and spending that are unconstitutional under the original constitutional structure. Now we're returning to a society of limited government, and implicitly, therefore, as the government shrinks, the freedom of the population expands. No problem. No, not even a Republican has said that. They both believe that is the role, responsibility, and the duty of government to be a political paternalist, to be a social engineer, to be a central planner. Now, their visions of what the social engineering and the political paternalism should be about, what parts of human life, what areas of the economy, what social arenas, what forms they should take of the interventions, the regulations, the prohibitions, the controls, they differ on that, but they accept the mechanism that is the role of the government to do these things. They're just arguing about what will be done and how it will be done. And as long as that remains the case, there'll be no change. Then there's the pragmatic aspect of this, which is realpolitik, as they say it. The election is over. Everyone in the House of Representatives, even before they've officially come in, in the next few days, the new Congress, they're already running for re-election in the next 2 years from now, election for the House of Representatives. Their horizon goes no further than 2 years because all of them have the quest for power to remain in office, to never leave office. And the only way you stay in office is to constantly tell your constituents, given the ideological framework of both parties, this is what I'm going to do for you, either with other people's money or with this money that comes out of the air, those deficit dollars, much of it, as you were alluding to earlier as well, end up being monetized by the Federal Reserve as part of the money creation process. And the Democrats do this ad nauseum because they don't even believe in any restraints other than maybe what sex position you can practice in your bedroom. But everything else they want to regulate and control. And the Republicans have their own agendas this way. And so all are pragmatists. Because look, the election is over, but 1/3 of the Senate is going to be up for re-election in 2 years. That 1/3 of senators whose terms have to be renewed are already running for re-election. And they haven't even officially become reestablished in their positions for the next term. This is the mindset. And given that constraint of the time horizon of the average practical politician is never more than 2 years, and a president 4 years, if he has the ability to be reelected, means that they're locked into an institutional framework that gives them this myopia of only what's in front of them, what is seen and not what is unseen. And as a consequence of this, unless there's the broader ideological change that makes people ask themselves, why would I want someone in political office? And what do I consider his role and duties to be as an elected official in a free society? And then people running for office who equally sharing that view say, my role is not to give away goodies, but to take away the cookie jar that the government should have never had to play with. Until that occurs, it's just going to continue this way. That is the importance of the arena of ideas, to change the political currents, the outlook that people have, the belief of what they understand to mean by freedom for themselves in their social interactions with others in the marketplace, and then therefore which would be the extremely limited role of a government in a free society.
Yeah, that's a really important point is that we got to keep emphasizing, which we do here at FFF, the larger context of what a free society is and what is genuinely needed to achieve that free society. And again, it goes back to what I was saying earlier. You need to identify what it is that is infringing on the freedom of the citizenry and then make the case for eliminating it. And if all you do is reform it, you haven't achieved freedom at all, any more than reforming slavery in the 19th century would have meant freedom for slaves. It's not freedom. Freedom means dismantling the structure that prevents people from being free. And I'm glad you mentioned the Federal Reserve on this, because they perform an invaluable role here. I mean, if you look, there was a reason why Roosevelt nationalized gold and made it illegal to own gold. Even the Constitution called for gold coins and silver coins to be the official money. It was the official money of the American people for more than 100 years. But Roosevelt knew that with a gold standard, you can't print gold. You can print money, paper money. And so by converting to a paper money system without even the semblance of a constitutional amendment, first by decree and then by legislative enactment, he knew that now the floodgates were open to spend out whatever he wanted, but have the Federal Reserve as a partner to just print the money up. Because as you were alluding to earlier, when people know that they're having to pay taxes for all this spending, there's a cost there. People may say, well, hey, wait a minute, maybe I don't want all this spending. I want to keep more of my money. But the Federal Reserve, by just printing the money, creates a solution that all these things are free. Social Security is free. Medicare is free. All this foreign interventionism is free. Foreign aid to Ukraine is free. Stimulus checks are free. But really, if there's a debasement of the dollar, debasement of the currency. And you can see it. I mean, you can go back to, the last 4 years and show the debasement. They call it price inflation. But I think, as you point out, it's more important to look at the overall context of things from 1913, from the time the Federal Reserve was established. You see a downward trend in the value of the dollar. That's because the Federal Reserve is there for one purpose, and that's to accommodate all this debt. Pay that debt off with cheap, newly printed money so that people blame the store owner and the service station owner and greed and all this other distracting nonsense, rather than focus in on that it is the federal government that is not only responsible for this, well, more specifically, the whole welfare warfare state system and the managed economy system and the drug war system. That's this system that is responsible not only for this out of control spending and debt, it's also responsible for the massive debasement of the dollar that we have seen all of our lives.
I'd like to add one other point to this. You mentioned it at the beginning of your remarks, and that is a lot of people are concerned. Well, if we don't raise the debt limit, we're going to default. That is financially incorrect. Yes, because of the rise in interest rates in the last couple of years, the government does pay more interest when it borrows money. And therefore, the annual debt sum that the federal government has to pay, just the interest, they really are not paying back any of the principal. They just keep borrowing money for new spending, which adds to the total debt, which they basically pay just the interest on. And any debt that, in terms of maturity, becomes due, they just roll over as a new debt so that the total debt never shrinks. And you're basically just paying interest payments. The government takes in more than enough revenues, actual tax revenues, to pay the interest on that due federal debt. We will not go bankrupt, will not default, will not fall in arrears to our creditors, whether they be domestic or foreign. So that is a bugaboo. Tax revenues are far more than enough to meet the interest payments on the national debt. But what that means is that since some of that revenue that is not new borrowed money has to come from actual tax revenues to pay the debt the interest payments that come due on the debt, that means that other corners and directions of government spending will have to be cut to make room for those interest payments on the debt. But this is just this is a red herring that has nothing to do with the reality. As if the government didn't borrow, they would go in arrears and default. Untrue. It just means that to meet the debt payments, which the federal government has contracted for from domestic and foreign lenders, would require more reductions in domestic spending, given what would remain of the tax revenues collected after paying the interest on the debt. And that's the reality that they don't want to deal with, because then they have to tell a whole bunch of taxpayers and voters, guess what? We either have to raise your taxes or we have to take some of the cookies out of the cookie jar that you've been having your hand in, which we've been happily giving you. And that's what they don't want to face.
Yeah, and they want to assume that all these people that are on the federal largesse, that are feeding at the federal trough, that can't be reduced, that's fixed. That they act like that can't be touched. Well, bull. Of course it can be touched. You just tell people we're laying you off. We don't have the money here. We got a debt ceiling. But that's what they don't, that's the reality they don't want to do. So they go off on this lark of, oh, well, there'll have to be a default on the debt. As you point out, no, there doesn't. And there doesn't have to be any default on the debt. You pay your debt, but you slash spending in other areas, the non-mandatory areas. So I say enforce the debt ceiling, shut the government down. You know that when they call it a government shutdown, Richard, it's not really a shutdown. They keep the military there. They keep other people there. They call them the essentials. Well, if something's non-essential, what's it there for anyway? Now you and I
Well,
we would argue that non-essential covers about 98% of the federal government. But at the very least, if we go by their definition, that should be enough to balance the budget.
well, several years ago, when they did have one of these, phony baloney shutdowns for a couple of weeks or whatever it was, there was a political cartoon that had a government building in Washington, D.C., and a banner over it. Welcome back, non-essential workers. They're non-essential. Don't bring them back. It
Right.
basically is saying, okay, what are some of the responsibilities of the federal government under the Constitution? A military. We're not talking about what the size of the military should be. We're talking about duties and responsibilities in the abstract. The military, the court system, and certain other obligations that the Constitution says. Whether we like it or not, there's the post office in the Constitution, but it's pretty small, right? By standards of today, it's pretty small. So if those are the essential things, then all the others can be done away with. In fact, if the government goes into one of these phony baloney shutdowns and these people are told to go home and they're not in their offices, not doing their work, guess what? They're not regulating our lives. It's an automatic pilot. Matter of fact, I'm only almost willing to pay their salaries to stay home and stay out of my business. It's like paying the racketeer. Please, here's some money. Don't break my store window. Don't break my leg. I'll just make you your protection. Just leave me alone.
Right. Yeah. But what they do is they as you call it, is phony baloney shutdown. because as soon as they strike their predictable deal, they give these people their back pay.
Exactly.
It's like a paid
Exactly.
vacation. But as you point out, well, that's better that they're not working. At least they're not doing this damage.
Exactly.
Yeah, well, ultimately, Richard, the ultimate question everybody in this country ought to be discussing, debating, talking about is what should be the role of government in a free society? That's the critical question. That's a question we're going to be presenting with people all year long.
Everybody always talks about New Year's resolutions. And what are you going to do differently for the new year? And of course, people always backslide. Oh, I was going to cut down how much I drink. Oh, I was going to go on a diet to lose some weight. Oh, I was going to start exercising by running or going to the gym. And they don't do it. Well, it may very well be that nothing changes in government when we look back a year from now. However, our New Year's resolution as advocates and friends of freedom would be that we will continue to consistently make the case for liberty and in every peaceful and persuasive and polite way to inform our fellow Americans on the importance of why we should have a free society, what a free society represents, and how much of our society is unfree in both domestic and foreign affairs because of the scope and the size of the government as it is today. And that is that scope and size of government that has to be our New Year's resolution to see a lot smaller a year from now.
On that eloquent note, we'll wrap things up. Richard, I look forward to working with you in the year ahead, and I look forward to sharing ideas on liberty and how we can get this country back on the right track with all of you that support us and view our work. Happy New Year to all of you.
Happy New Year.